A listener note: this story contains adult content and language.
One morning, attorney David Latt was sitting in his apartment in D.C., flipping through the Sunday New York Times, when he arrived at his favorite part of the paper.
I have to confess, I am a devoted reader of the New York Times wedding announcements.
Latt loves the wedding section, even though the vast majority of couples are total strangers to him.
They are looking for people with impressive pedigrees. They are looking for people who are photogenic.
But on that morning, he spotted a pair of familiar faces.
They were both a very impressive, accomplished young lawyers. They were a very nice-looking couple. So if anyone was going to make it into those pages, it was going to be Dan and Wendi.
Latt began to read. Wendi Jill Adelson, the daughter of Donna Sue Adelson and Dr. Harvey J. Adelson of Coral Springs, Florida, is to be married this evening to Dan Eric Markell, the son of Ruth Markell and Phil Markell of Toronto. The bride, 26, is keeping her name.
I think it was the best wedding I've ever been to.
Avery Kohlers was a high school buddy of Dan's. He made the trip to Boca Raton for the celebration, as did around 200 other friends and family members. The weather, perfect. The venue, extravagant. And at the center of all of it, the happy couple. Dan and Wendi danced for hours with their guests.
It just felt like it was overflowing with joy and love. I mean, that sounds so corny.
I actually found an email I sent to Dan on March 4 of 2006. Hi, Dan. Congratulations and best wishes to you and Wendi. I'm sitting at home reading the Sunday Times, and lo and behold, there you are. Best, Dave. And it's funny, Dan actually responded because Dan was a very diligent email responder, even though he was on his honeymoon.
Greetings from Club Med, he wrote.
And then I responded, you're checking email on your honeymoon. You truly are a cyber addict. I thought I was bad. Don't respond to this email. Hope you're having a wonderful time.
So what makes a good marriage anyway?
I guess I would say that crucial to a good marriage is mutual respect. Love, of course, but also respect.
But as you can probably guess, this isn't a story about the happy ever afters, the lucky ones, the couples who grow more inseparable with age. Not even close.
I have to be a little circumspect here because over the years I've become very familiar with the libel laws of the United States. So I don't think I'm going to give my personal view here.
It's a story about the opposite: a bad marriage, a worse breakup, a brutal divorce.
And he stormed out. And did he say something like, I told you should never be marrying her?
This is probably the biggest story I'll ever work on. It's probably the biggest story in Tallahassee ever, I would say.
And everything that came after.
Somebody else fucking knows something because this shit would have not came out unless he told someone else. But there's nothing.
I have never said to anyone that my mom is a dangerous person.
Oh, are you saying that you think maybe one of your friends would have done something like that?
Who would do this?
What would you do to save the life of your child? That's the big question asked in NBC's thrilling new drama, The Enemy Within. The amazing Jennifer Carpenter plays CIA agent Erica Shepard, who gave up 4 fellow agents to save her daughter's life. Now, even though she's considered a traitor, Erica partners with FBI agent Will Keaton, played by Morris Chestnut, to take down the man who set her up. Don't miss The Enemy Within, after the premiere of The Voice, Mondays, beginning February 25th on NBC. From Wondery, I'm Matthew Shaer, and this is Over My Dead Body.
Baby, I'm guilty. I've got his blood on my hand.
Baby, you're crazy. I never touched that man.
I've been a magazine writer for about a decade now. And during that time, I've made a habit of keeping certain ideas in my back pocket, Ideas that I plan on returning to at some point down the line. But in the past couple years, one particular criminal case has taken up the bulk of my free time. A case that says at least as much about marriage and love as it does about revenge and justice, and the lengths we'll go to get even. This season of Over My Dead Body is called Tally, and this is episode 1, The Husband.
Can I just tell him? Leonard Cohen is my cousin and William Shatner. Leonard Cohen died, but William Shatner was there. And he,
you know those couples who've known each other so long that when they tell stories, they can finish each other's sentences? Ruth and Phil Markel are just like that. On this particular afternoon, the Markels are sitting on a couch in a home in a leafy residential neighborhood of Toronto, telling stories about their son, Dan.
He was very rambunctious, the furthest thing from a serious personality for him.
How he got lost in a shopping mall as a boy.
He went to the kiosk and he asked the lady, "Can I use your phone, please, to call home? Because I lost my father."
How he was ambitious, even as a teenager.
By the time he was about 13 and a half, he decided, no, I'm not going to be a rabbi, but I'm going to be the president of the synagogue.
By high school, Dan was telling anyone who would listen that someday he was going to go to Harvard.
I'll never forget when he got accepted. It was the most unbelievable thing. He was like on cloud 99. He was just so happy because he actually got what he really planned for a long, long time.
Then he went on to Harvard Law School. After that, Dan clerked for a federal judge and landed a job at a prestigious law firm in D.C.
He had determination and he knew what he wanted, and he basically achieved everything.
Dan had it all, but he still hadn't found anyone he wanted to spend the rest of his life with.
He was looking for a family life. He was definitely looking for, like, let's call it like a settling. He was ready to settle down, as the expression goes.
And children were definitely going to be a part of his life, without question.
And then, one day, he met Wendi Adelson.
She was a beautiful girl, a woman.
Warm.
I mean, she was warm.
She presented herself as very warm.
Dan and Wendi had found each other on J-Date. They exchanged messages, joked, flirted. Soon, he was introducing her to his parents. Dan was proud of Wendy's academic pedigree, which almost matched his. Magna cum laude from Brandeis, master's degree from Cambridge. She was 7 years younger than Dan. When they met, she was at law school at the University of Miami.
I mean, everything was very positive. There was absolutely no question or doubts in our minds. I mean, she's Jewish. She came from a Jewish family, originally from New York. Father was a dentist. The mother was whatever.
School teacher.
The kids, she had siblings, and everything was, I mean, what more can Jewish parents want from their kids?
Dan and Wendi had started off long distance, him in D.C. and her in Miami. But it was a rocket courtship. In May of 2005, Dan accepted a tenure-track job at Florida State University in Tallahassee, where he and Wendi planned to start a life together. That same month, the couple took a trip to Israel. In the village of Tiberias, overlooking the Sea of Galilee, Dan proposed and Wendi accepted. On his blog, Dan wrote, "All I can say is, wow, did I win the lottery of life." A lot of other people thought so too. As a couple, Dan and Wendi were charismatic. They played off each other's energy.
It was Thursday night, September 1st, 2005, and I'm at this wedding. I'm a single guy. I'm on the dance floor, kind of feeling like lonely, and I walk off the dance floor, and I'm just kind of strolling around this big hotel ballroom at the Pierre Hotel near Central Park in New York City.
Zach Schreier knew Dan from Harvard.
A really attractive young lady stops me, and she says, "I recognize you from my fiance's Friendster page."
Yeah, Friendster. This was the 2000s.
It was like the pre-Facebook kind of, but I guess nowhere near as successful. But her fiance apparently had a Friendster page, and she recognized me as one of the friends in it. And I said, "Oh, who's your fiance?" And she said, "Dan Markel." So, of course, I was, talking to Wendi and meeting her for the first time.
Dan and Wendi wasted no time hatching a plan. They were going to set Zach up with one of Wendy's friends.
Dan said, she's beautiful, she's Jewish, she's brilliant, she's got a great body, and Wendy's kind of blushing and shut up. He goes, well, she does, and you have to meet her. So Wendi picks up her cell phone and calls Abigail and leaves a voicemail. And what did the voicemail say?
She said, Abigail, stop dating. We found your beshert. And beshert is like your intended, as you probably know. And that was that.
Zach lived in L.A. Abigail lived in Washington, D.C., thousands of miles apart. So what, Dan said. He'd done long distance too, and look how it turned out.
Abigail and I went on our first date, and that's the last first date I've ever been on.
The Schreiers got married, and of course, the couple who introduced them were at the wedding. But Abigail didn't want to give Dan and Wendi too big of a role.
There was always a fair amount of drama with the couple. I'm not a person who likes drama very much.
The drama Abigail mentions, it was no small thing. Abigail says at one point, Wendi told her she was thinking of breaking off her engagement with Dan.
Wendi took me for a walk and said, Dan had offended a friend of Wendy's about his feelings about affirmative action.
See, anyone who knew Dan knew that he never encountered an argument he wouldn't take up for sport. He wasn't even against affirmative action as a policy. He just liked to debate.
He was posing hypotheticals to her, and he had really offended Wendy's friend. And she said she needed to go on a walk with me. We went on a walk, and she said, I don't know what to do. Can I love this? Basically, should I get back together with him?
Apparently, Wendi decided she could. A few months later, she and Dan were married. Still, that drama, it didn't go away, even on Dan and Wendy's wedding day. Although the Markells and the Adelsons were both paying for the wedding, it was Wendy's parents who'd hired the caterer. Dan had wanted the wedding to be strictly kosher, but
when we arrived, the food was not kosher. And we noticed right away they had dairy and meat both being offered at the same time. And that's when we both kind of started to step away, not sure what's going on here.
The Markells were blindsided.
Dan was going around to each of his guests who kept kosher, we do, and saying, I'm so sorry. Please don't eat the food. It's not kosher. I'm so sorry.
Dan had recruited a rabbi friend as officiant, and the catering put him in an especially awkward position with his buddy.
The rabbi that he had asked to officiate had to leave the wedding at that point.
Dan must have felt awful. But if he let the kosher mix-up more than trip him up momentarily, Abigail didn't see it.
And this is Dan. He went to every person who kept kosher and apologized to them personally. And then he ran right back to the dance floor and started dancing with her again.
After the wedding, Dan and Wendi returned to Tallahassee, where Dan threw himself into life as an academic. He taught, he published papers, he traveled the country attending conferences. And it was at those conferences that fellow attorney David Latt would see him.
Dan, on the legal conference circuit, was something of a rock star. He appeared on many, many panels. He was a speaker, often, I believe, a keynote speaker.
Latt had been friends with Dan at Harvard, and now they found themselves running in the same circles again.
Dan and I reconnected through legal blogging. I started 2 legal blogs, and Dan founded a very popular, influential law professor blog called Prof's Blog.
Normally, Dan's blog dealt with the ins and outs of his legal theories of crime and punishment, or the latest developments on the courts. But in July of 2009, Dan had some more personal news to share. Wendi and I welcomed a little and delicious 7-pound, 5-ounce baby boy into the world last night, Wednesday, at 10:58 p.m. Everyone is flourishing. The baby naming ceremony and bris will take place next week on Thursday in the Hassie. More details to follow, but I'm using Facebook Mobile to pepper the world with inanities and new pics. So, if you're interested, follow Bam Bam's life journey there. With gratitude and blessings, Wendi Adelson and Danny Markell. Next to it, he posted a photo. Here's a pic of the little guy, dreaming of whitefish salad and other smoked delicacies to come. If you were a regular reader of Prof's blog in those years, you would have gotten a picture that Dan and Wendi's marriage was, well, happy. When Wendi competed in a triathlon, Dan gushed about it. When Wendi wrote a novel, Dan promoted her book signing. On the blog, she was Osita, little bear in Spanish. Dan wasted no opportunity to fawn over her, which struck even his close friends as a little over the top.
It was really out there. It was really Dan. You know, it was amazingly uncool. It was amazingly, brash. But it was so unbelievably genuine that I kind of don't know how you couldn't have been disarmed by it.
Even in person, Zach Schreier remembers the couple could engage in the kind of PDA that's usually reserved for teenagers.
He literally jumps on Wendi on this bed and just sort of smothers her and starts like kissing her right in front of me on this bed in a way that was, mostly just playful, not as wildly inappropriate as it sounds, but just sort of like ridiculous, funny drama, love.
He was relentless in a certain sense. He was relentless with love.
So then, imagine that you're Dan Markel. You're on a short business trip to New York. You get a call from your wife. She tells you she's leaving you. You cut your trip short. You're sure you can still convince her to reconsider. You get the first flight home. But as you open the door, you notice the house is weirdly quiet, echoey. It's never this quiet. Then you notice a lot of the furniture in the living room is gone. The kids' room, mostly empty. In fact, pretty much everything is gone, including your wife and the kids. You walk into your bedroom. The bed is still there. And on it, you see a stack of divorce papers. In re the marriage of Wendi Adelson, petitioner wife, and Dan Markel, respondent husband, petition for dissolution of marriage. Dan's parents, Ruth and Phil, came down the next day for a visit.
Unfortunately, his whole home was totally devastated, and all of the children's clothing and the children's toys and bed and stuff like that were gone.
Dan would later use a phrase from history to describe what he felt his wife had just done to him. Pearl Harbor.
On December 7th, 1941, Japan, like its infamous Axis partners, struck first and declared war afterwards.
Dan and Wendi had become close with a couple who lived near them in Tallahassee, Jeremy and Tracy Cohen. A day or two later, Dan went to see them.
He was very angry.
Yeah, he was,
very devastated.
Yeah, emotional and, upset, furious, just overwhelmed by what had happened. And I think his way of processing was kind of talking through it, and he needed, that sounding board, and that's not a conversation where there was back and forth. It was, 2 hours where he spoke for an hour and 58 minutes probably, and I don't know, was still processing it. She didn't want to have to deal with that face-to-face conflict, and so it was easier for her to kind of separate herself, leave the papers behind, and never have to confront him.
He had no clue.
Really, though? Maybe Dan should have seen it coming. Hey, it's Matt. We're thrilled to have some great sponsors supporting our show. And when I heard we had Simply Safe coming on board, I was relieved. Getting a security system is something we've been discussing at my house for a while. Then a few weeks ago, we woke up to a cop chasing someone through our backyard. He'd been trying to break into cars on our block. So, yeah, time to finally get that security system. Getting to know Simply Safe has been a real pleasure. They believe that no one should feel unsafe at home. In fact, that's been their mission from day one. Simply Safe blankets your whole home with protection, offering around-the-clock professional monitoring that makes sure police are on the way when you need them. The security sensors are tiny, blending in with your home so you won't notice them. Do what I did and get started protecting your home today. You'll get free shipping on any system order by visiting simplysafe.com/overmy. That's simplysafe.com/overmy to protect your home and family today. One more time, simplysafe.com/overmy. Last year, together with a reporter friend of mine, Eric Benson, I traveled down to Tallahassee to talk with some of the people who had known Dan and Wendi best. Basically everywhere we went, people told us, Tallahassee is sleepy. Tallahassee's quiet. Tallahassee is basically a village. Sure, it's the capital of Florida, but it's North Florida, a big difference from, say, the area around Miami. It feels more like the Deep South. Spanish moss, humidity as thick as a blanket, bugs the size of your fist. Tracy and Jeremy Cohen live in one of the nicest neighborhoods in town.
The neighborhood's called Benton Hills. If you look at the sign, it's modeled after the Beverly Hills sign, so it has aspirations.
Kind of suburban neighborhood.
They've been here a decade. They have 2 kids and run a small business together.
But for the most part, it is houses that were built in the 50s and 60s and 70s. So it's kind of a mix of older retired couples and then more and more young families with children.
They ended up moving to this neighborhood, Benton Hills, where Dan and Wendi lived.
We had our first child in 2007, and then I guess met them shortly after that at a party.
Right.
We were still kind of in the mode of trying to meet new people and meet new friends in Tallahassee.
Wendi was charming, with blonde hair and big, bright blue eyes, which Tracy would later find out were enhanced with teal contacts. Dan was chatty, intense, with light brown hair and glasses.
There was kind of a spark there, and we talked to each other pretty much the whole party and made plans to hang out after that, and started hanging out.
It had been a job that brought their new friends to Tallahassee, Dan's job. And the law school had offered Wendi a teaching position too, on a contract basis.
To get these attractive candidates like Danny, the law school has often to accommodate their spouses, right? And Tallahassee is a notoriously difficult place for that.
Fernando Tesson is an Argentine diplomat and a retired member of the faculty at FSU's law school. He helped hire Dan.
We're not New York, we're not Washington, we're not Chicago. There's not stuff that the spouses can do.
Tallahassee certainly wasn't Wendi's first choice, but she tried to make do.
In order to please Danny, gave her a clinical job. And I think that in that job, she did pretty well. She connected with the people who do human trafficking, and she did pretty well there. Her performance, I think, exceeded a little bit expectations.
Over time, Dan and Wendi became a kind of Tallahassee power couple. A lot of Fridays, Dan and Wendi hosted big Shabbat dinners in their home.
He and Wendi loved pulling together people from the Jewish community, but also outside the Jewish community, and sharing this meal with a pretty broad array of really interesting people.
But the Cohens also saw the cracks in the relationship. A bunch of small couple-type things, like arguments over chores.
I could see him being a tough guy to be married to. He was not the person who mowed the lawn, right? He didn't do a whole lot of dishes.
But there were some bigger issues, too. Ones that dated back to their wedding day.
They were very careful about keeping a kosher home. I will say, Wendi broke that every once in a while, and I think that was a point of contention between the two of them. But for Danny, he took it very seriously.
Their friend Abigail Schreier says that Dan's Jewish identity mattered to him a lot.
He was a very thoroughly Jewish guy. It's sort of hard to convey that sometimes, but he really was. It's something that was in his bones.
For example, Dan believed he was a Kohen, a member of the Jewish priestly class. He took that role seriously.
One of the strictures is if you're a Kohen, you're not supposed to visit a gravesite. You can go to a funeral, but you're not actually supposed to sort of, as far as I know, defile yourself by going to the gravesite.
Wendi, she didn't quite accept the sacrifices that came with that.
Her grandmother died, and he said, "I'm sorry, I can't go." I think this was their first year of marriage. And she and her, from what he told me, she and her family could not understand this. How could you possibly do this to my grandmother? How could you do this to us? Why wouldn't you go?
Around this time, Wendi also started to work on a novel. It was called This Is Our Story. She asked her friend Tracy for help editing it. And when Tracy read the manuscript, she was surprised to find that major parts of the novel appeared to be pretty nakedly autobiographical. Tallahassee had been redubbed Hiawassee Springs. The attorney narrator was Lily, not Wendi, but still, the rest seemed awfully familiar. In the novel, Lily hates her adopted city of Hiawassee Springs. Here's how she describes her arrival there. It was pouring rain, which was just as well because it obscured the fact that Hiawassee Springs was, shall we say, less than I expected. It's my own fault, really, not having done enough research. I just assumed, and we all know what assuming does, that Hiawassee Springs was in Florida and would be just like other parts of Florida I knew. Lily, Lily, Lily. I definitely found out how wrong you can be with assumptions. By all accounts, Wendi was not a fan of Tallahassee. She would have been happier in Miami, where her passion for immigration law would be put to better use, and where she could be closer to her extended family. Except for one brother who lived outside Florida, the close-knit Adelson clan lived and worked around Miami. But there's more than just hating Tallahassee. The Lily character in Wendi's novel also fears she's become trapped in a broken marriage. Did I even love him anymore? Lily thinks to herself. Or did I just love the idea of being attached to something, knowing that I was moving in one particular direction? I was lost without a clear idea of where I might be headed.
My time is precious and I won't waste it reading that novel, but people who have read it said it's a piece of crap.
Dan dutifully promoted the novel on his blog. But to close friends, he was less positive.
Danny was intellectually very rigorous. And my suspicion, this is complete speculation on my part, you have to understand, is that he thought it was crap and and did not deserve intellectual respect.
I think, Danny is a true scholar, right? And his research meant a lot to him. He was very well respected in the field. And that was not an academic piece of literature, right? And so I think Danny kind of turned his nose up a little bit at that. And he said he didn't read it. And he's kind of wasn't interested in reading it because it wasn't the type of book that he would want to read.
The novel was eventually published. Dan still never read it.
Which was a mortal wound for Wendi. It really hurt her feelings.
Yeah, you think about that. Your wife pours her heart and soul into this book that's gotten pretty broad acclaim, and he feels like he didn't want to take the time out to read it. I mean, that would hurt me.
If you're married to somebody and that somebody does something or says something or publishes something worthless, what are you going to do?
I think take the 2.5 hours and read it.
That's my colleague Eric Benson, talking with Sassone.
Yeah, he could have said that and then told her that it was crap. Right. Not having read it was not like the best marital thing to do.
Dan and Wendi had what seemed, on the outside, like a storybook romance. Whirlwind courtship, picture-perfect engagement, lavish wedding. But in the book, Lily's attitude towards love seems more transactional. I see dating, at its best, as nothing more than a romantic interview. Are you the kind of person who would produce good-looking, smart, and nice children and never cheat on me and help me clean up the kitchen and love me even when I'm grouchy and not trade me in for a younger model and not join the other team? The real-life Wendi had gotten some of those things by marrying Dan. Successful in his career, a couple of kids, not so much on the cleaning the kitchen part. And Dan wasn't completely clueless about Wendi's dissatisfaction. During that time, Dan and Wendi visited their friends, the Schreiers, in Los Angeles.
I remember Dan saying to Zach, "Don't you wish you asked a lot more questions before you got married," or something like that.
But he was also confident he could make it work.
Dan sort of feels like if there's a problem, he just needs to, punch past it, get past it. That was always my impression of him. An obstacle was just an excuse for not getting things done. And I think he felt that way in the relationship too.
Wendi, meanwhile, was moving in a very different direction. She'd had enough of living in a city she hated. She had a plan. She was going to get a lawyer, book moving trucks, fill out divorce papers. And then she was going to take her 2 boys and get the hell out of Tallahassee. I'm a big fan of sleep. There's no doubt about it. My bed is my happy place. I've got a few friends that use Boll & Branch sheets. I must have heard 3,000 times now how great these sheets are. And I got to thinking that maybe it's time to trade in the sheets my wife and I got as a wedding gift 5 years ago. So I'm ordering my new Boll & Branch sheets, poking around on their website, and I realize that this is a really cool company. People are at the heart of everything they do, from the farmers who grow their organic cotton to the people who sleep on their sheets at night. Everything Boll & Branch makes is designed with your comfort in mind. From their 100% organic cotton signature soft sheets to their cozy throws to their plush towels. That might be why they have thousands of 5-star reviews. If you want to try these sheets out with me, there's no reason not to. Boll & Branch wants you to love your purchase, so they offer a no-risk 30-day trial and free shipping. As a listener of Over My Dead Body, you can get $50 off your first set of sheets at bollandbranch.com. Promo code OVERMY. That's $50 off your first set of sheets at BOLL and branch.com. Promo code OVERMY. bollandbranch.com. Promo code OVERMY. Over My Dead Body comes from Wondery, the makers of Dr. Death, American Scandal, and Legal Wars. As you can tell from the battle between Danny and Wendi, the worst legal wars are driven by emotion, and the desire to get justice can escalate into revenge. In Legal Wars, you'll learn the backstory of some of the most divisive cases that have entered the courtroom, from Hulk Hogan and the takedown of the gossip site Gawker to the monkey selfie case. You'll hear the courtroom stories that have changed the way we live. Stay tuned till the end of the episode for a preview of Legal Wars. And don't forget to subscribe to Legal Wars on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to this right now. A couple weeks before Pearl Harbor, Wendi and Dan went on a trip with some friends, including their neighbors, the Cohens.
We took a beach trip with ourselves, our families, and the Markel Adelsons, another couple and their kids, and then the two of us and our children. And we went to, I think, St. George for the day. And while we were sitting at a cafe.
On that trip, Wendi shared something with Tracy Cohen.
Wendi told me and the other friend that she was planning on leaving Danny within a couple weeks. She had the date picked out, and she let us know that that was imminent.
Tracy told me after that weekend and kind of swore me to secrecy.
Jeremy Cohen thought about saying something to Dan.
I looking back, I definitely could have been a better friend there and could have stepped in and shared that or done something.
After the split, Dan would vent about Pearl Harbor to any friend who'd listen.
I heard about people he ran into like in the airport, and they're like, "So how are things going?" He's like, and went down the story of very personal, hurtful thing that had happened to him, and he laid it all out there for a lot of other people to hear.
So I said, well, there was another woman. That's the first thing I think. And she said, no. So, well, I don't imagine there was any abuse or anything. No, of course, no abuse, no alcohol, no drugs, no infidelity. Did she have somebody, maybe a guy and a boyfriend? No. And I could not for my life get from him a coherent thing that was 100% persuasive about the cause of the breakup. He said that she resented him because he was like this kind of a tenured superstar or something, and she didn't feel like she was at his level and resented that. Then she wrote this novel.
Yeah, that novel again. Maybe if Dan had read it all the way through, he would have gotten a stronger hint of what was coming. At the very end, the character Lily finds her purpose through her work, adopts a baby one of her immigrant clients must give up for adoption, and ends up separated from her husband.
There are many bad things about being a lawyer, I'm sure, but one thing about being a lawyer is that we are trained to hear both sides. So I always told Danny, when he was telling me all these bad things, I said, well, okay, Danny, if Wendi was here, what would she say? Well, she said she would say that she could not stand being with me in Tallahassee, that she felt frustrated within the marriage because I didn't respect her, blah, blah, blah. She would say that to me when I asked him about what would be Wendy's story, but I never got Wendy's story.
Dan blasted out an email to a bunch of his friends.
He sent out an email about how devastated he was, how determined he was to get Winter back and make it work, how confounded he was by what was going on. And he concluded it with, "Love mightily while you can." And that was very Dan, to turn it and then just wish the best for the rest of us. Tell us like what we should be doing and hope for the best.
Abigail picked up the phone and called Dan. She led with a joke, a callback to the fact that he and Wendi had been the ones who'd set her up successfully with her husband. "Dan, I've got the girl for you." Dan laughed. But as they talked, she could hear how broken he was.
He started to cry, and he said to me, "What's going to happen with my boys?" He said, "Their connection to Yiddishkeit, to Judaism, is already so attenuated. What's going to become of them?" And I'd never heard Dan cry. It was really heartbreaking.
For 2 weeks after she left him, Wendi didn't even tell Dan where she and the boys were living. So he would wait for Wendi at their kids' school, a morning drop-off, an afternoon pickup.
And I think that was one way of kind of seeing her, and he tried to figure out when she was going to be there and be in the parking lot and to try to confront her.
But not legal confrontation, not yet. Because Dan was still holding on to the hope, however distant, that he could woo Wendi back. He could make the family whole again. It didn't take long for friends like the Cohens to start choosing sides.
So there was definitely a Team Wendi and a Team Danny, and we were on Team Danny, from the beginning. And I was, and I think it's a function also of he lived on our street. Our kids went to school together, and we're roughly the same age.
Hoping that you will stay. I had one divorce from my first wife many years ago, and as you know, in these divorce issues, people take sides. And I decided, as much as I liked Wendi, right? Because I still liked her, I mean, Danny had chosen me as one of his confidants. So I was not entitled, I thought, to go back to her and talk to her. I thought that was not consistent with my role as Danny's friend.
For a guy who really liked to be in control, things had gotten a little out of control for him in an unpleasant way. Not that he was a control freak. I don't mean to suggest that he wasn't, but this was not the plan in any way.
Wendi may have been relieved to escape a marriage that made her unhappy, but striking out on her own turned out to be not so simple. As it became increasingly clear to Dan that he was never getting Wendi back, his attitude changed.
Yeah, I'd say that there were two phases to the post-divorce life for Danny. The first phase was it was immediately after this Pearl Harbor moment where she dropped the papers on the bed, and he was committed to winning her back. And when it was clear that wasn't happening, then he shifted into the second phase, which was fighting it like hell.
Dan Markel became famous in the legal world, in part due to his unique theories on crime and punishment, which he often discussed on his blog. To Dan, a big part of why we punish criminals is to reinforce the unspoken pact we all have as a society.
Dan was taking the side that, no, it's a positive good for offenders to suffer in the course of being punished, because that's part of how we right the scales.
That's his law school colleague, Mark Spotswood.
That's part of how we signal to them that, what you did was wrong, and you as a sort of equal moral member of society deserve to be held to account for that.
So, and I'm summarizing here, Dan's theories are building on one of the oldest ideas around, that justice is all about getting even. So once the gloves were off, once it was clear their marriage was never going back to how it was, how would Dan and Wendi get what they wanted?
You live in, the modern world where most of us are, pretty safe, and then completely out of the blue, someone walks into the garage and shoots them in the face.
That's on the next episode of Over My Dead Body. From Wondery, this is part 1 of 6 of Over My Dead Body, a story about love, death, and family. If you'd like to help us spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your friends to subscribe. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, and every major listening app, as well as on Wondery.com. If you're listening on a smartphone, tap or swipe over the cover art of this podcast. You'll find the episode notes, including some details you may have missed. You'll also find some offers from our sponsors. Supporting them helps us offer our shows for free. And thank you. Over My Dead Body was written and reported by me, Matthew Shaer, and Eric Benson. Sound design by Jeff Schmidt. Associate producer is Chris Siegel. Executive produced by George Lavender, Marshall Louis, and Hernan Lopez for Wondery.
Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a verdict?
Yes, we have.
Every day around the United States, verdicts are given and lives are changed.
How say you, Madam Foreperson?
The stakes might be different, but every case leaves its mark.
We, the jury, find the defendant in the above entitled case, find the defendant not guilty.
Find the defendant guilty.
The court of law can be a battlefield over money, paternity, even people's lives.
Has been acquitted.
And the consequences can be huge.
After the verdict, they
Lawyer said she's extremely excited by the Supreme Court.
If you're sitting in the jury box, what would you do? From Wondery, the network behind Dirty John and American History Tellers, Legal Wars puts you in the center of some of the most famous and infamous cases in American history. From Hulk Hogan's courtroom wrestling match with Gawker to the battle for free speech on the internet and the Rodney King trial that set off the LA riots. On Wondery's new series, Legal Wars, we'll take you through all the surprising twists and turns behind those cases and many more. I'm Hill Harper. Legal Wars premieres October 9th. Subscribe today on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening right now. I tell you, you're gonna love Legal Wars, so check us out. Legal Wars. See you in court.